very lenient sentences were rendered. Let's look at the local community I hail from, for instance. The 7 accused and indicted before this tribunal have in the meantime been released, where we still need to find 1,178 missing persons who were probably victims of crimes, whereas the persons who may be responsible for them were released. So the lack of uniform criminal law policy employed by the ICTY is something that is now being transferred to the domestic courts as well. For instance, the state courts of Bosnia and Herzegovina now do pay attention to the fact that that adequate sentences need to be rendered. So the ICTY legacy was, in this respect, a painful one because victims did not feel that justice was meted out when it came to those accused of the most gravest crimes who were passed down lenient sentences. One other negative segment of the ICTY legacy is the early release of those convicted of war crimes. I think that 95% of those who were released who have served their sentences were out on early release before they served their full sentence. This again is perceived by the victims as a blow, not only by the victims but also by members of the ethnic groups to whom the accused and the convicted belonged, because they feel again that perhaps these individuals, having been released early, should not have been punished as harshly as they were. Another matter that I would like to point out as a grave problem which has been present ever since the inception of the tribunal as far as the victims are concerned, we have somehow ceased to be partners of the tribunal. Even at this stage, when discussions are taking place as to how to best preserve the ICTY legacy in the region, some other organizations, primarily human rights organizations, are being consulted, which do not gather victims. They seem to have imposed themselves as the proper partners. And as the only partners who would have a voice and a say in the process of deciding what is to become of the ICTY legacy. Behind them are financial centers which have throughout this time been supporting these human rights organizations, while at the same time victim associations were dependent on the local funding sources. And as a result of that, they are under the influence of local political oligarchies and are not a partner of the ICTY in this period when the ICTY legacy is being discussed. Although initially they were a part of the process, because all those who were busy investigating and prosecuting cases, they know very well that they largely had to depend on victim associations, which were the ones providing most of the assistance to witnesses and providing them support once their testimonies were given. And I don't want to take up any more time. I think I will wind up here.
Well, you know, the points that you have made, you know, if someone looked at this from the outside, my ears are clogged up. If they looked at this from the outside, they might say, well, courts are not supposed to do this. Courts are about trying and determining the guilt or innocence of the accused. I think it's different, though, as I tried to say, for the ICTY because of this broad, ambitious mandate. That's why the outreach program was established, with the understanding that we couldn't bring about or even help to maintain international peace and security unless the people in the region understood what we were doing. Is that not the case where you come from? Do the people understand what we're doing here?
Well, unfortunately, the first impression, and I am speaking mainly about the victims in the region where I come from, the problem is that you are distanced, both geographically, linguistically, and technologically from where we are. Most people do not have access to the tribunet or to the website of the tribunal, so that we are in fact dependent on what the media and the local politicians present us with. But unfortunately, for the most part, although the outreach program did attempt to improve the situation a bit, however, the negative perception of the tribunal prevails. The thing is that the perception of the victims is, in fact, that the tribunal is a positive final instance. We know at this point that in time in history that there was never before in the past any justice for victims, whereas this is the area where the tribunal actually did do its job. But what I'm trying to say is that the tribunal has not done enough to actually provide support to the victims who were the most significant pillar of the tribunal, and primarily to enable people to actually reconcile with each other, because it is difficult to try and reconcile and if anyone tries to do that, that won't happen. It is impossible to reconcile actually the people who committed the crimes and those who are victims. But the tribunal was supposed to contribute to a reconciliation overall, but that is what we don't have at this time. We do not have national courts that actually look up to the tribunal and see the tribunal as an example to follow. So this is the phase where we are actually in a transition period. We are trying to take over the experience of the tribunal. We have international prosecutors and judges in the chamber at the Sarajevo court, but I'm afraid that once they leave, what will remain are the local people, and we know that they can easily fall under the influence of the local politicians, where we will find then ourselves again in a situation where the trials will not be just. They might follow the basic legal regulations, but there will not be any justice, not true justice.
We did reach an agreement as to the order of the panelists, but since this is a talk show, and we can pretend like I'm Oprah, may I change the order and ask you to comment on that? I think that's something that you might have an opinion about.
Opinion about Mr. Remulich's contribution? You mean that, or?
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Did you ask me for the opinion about Mr. Remulich's contribution, or just to open?
No. You talked about the perception in your reflection of the ICTY. You talked about. Let me see. I'll lead you to a quote here. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. Maybe I should have stayed home because I can't hear. Okay. Mirko, you tell me that the public perception of its work was public. Now, the public perception of its work was never very high, but in the last year or two has reached an all-time low. You say that the ICTY has succeeded in alienating two main pillars, and you speak of human rights NGOs and victims associations. So what do you feel about victims' view of the relevance of the ICTY?
Okay, first of all, I speak on BCS, so take your...
I don't know whether what Mr. Ramulic has said, there is any need for me to say anything about why victim groups are losing faith in this tribunal. I have to be clear at the outset, and I have to say that I am one of those people, citizens of the former country, who considers that the establishment of the tribunal is one of the best things that had happened in their last 20 years of their lives, practically from the 90s on. And that is why I am where I am and doing the job that I am doing. But that will not prevent me from saying that the ad hoc tribunals, such as this one, are really the worst tool for trying mass crimes such as were committed in the former Yugoslavia, with the exception of all the other systems that are in existence already, especially when we compare them to the local judiciaries at the time before the international community actually set in motion reforms in the legal system in Yugoslavia. Of course, all of this in no way undermines my perception that the tribunal has a serious public relation problem in Yugoslavia, in the former Yugoslavia, far greater than it is with the international community. Its legacy is assured, and it has contributed for international justice at all kinds of levels, and that is not in doubt, but it still has to win that kind of reputation in the area of the former Yugoslavia. The problem is this, and that's all I will say in closing. You have actually established the outreach program, and I don't want this to sound as a heresy, but the support for the tribunal, especially in Serbia and Croatia, was far greater in 1999 before the outreach program was established than it is today, not because of the outreach program's work itself or what they did, not because of the work that the prosecutors and the judges did, simply because of the balance of powers in the local political circles and their attitude to the tribunal. When Milosevic and Tudjman were in power, being against them meant automatically being for the tribunal and the tribunal being in the right. Not necessarily because we felt that the tribunal could assist us in some ways to get rid of those elites, those political regimes. But nowadays, the political situation in those countries is far more complex. And the attitude of the public opinion is actually towards the tribunal is actually founded or grounded on what the politicians say about it. On the other hand, the tribunal, because of its passivity and its lack of interest for its own reputation in those countries, by making certain moves that Mr. Ramulic mentioned, actually made it easier for those elites to manipulate the public opinion and to use the tribunal for political ends of their own. That's all I would have to say for now.
Any other comments from the panelists on your side?
Bogdan,
I thought you might have a comment also. But go on, let's hear from your side.
Problem percepcije I odnosa sprem tribunala.
Well, the problem of the perception and the attitude towards the tribunal is very strange. Our disappointment is actually proportionate to our expectations. The entire burden of proving the crimes, the sentencing, the outreach program, and the promotion of justice was actually laid at the door of the tribunal. I would like to remind the gentleman here from well, there are gentlemen here who wouldn't say that they were from Bosnia. They'd rather use a different term. There are people who are in power there who did not even want to cooperate with the tribunal. And this went on for a very long time, up until 2001. And then there was a backlash in those communities which blamed the tribunal for not cooperating with their own communities because someone from the tribunal never actually came up and addressed them. And this is a classic system of manipulation that we have. We have a situation which we have to change. The perception of the tribunal is important, but for me right now, it is far more important what the perception will be of my court, my local court in Bosnia.